What's the most moronic thing you've witnessed with your own two eyes? I was working in a machine shop and Freddy wasn't paying attention to what he was doing and drilled right through his hand with a drill press. We called an ambulance and wrapped clean rags around his hand, then waited for the paramedics. While waiting, the blood-borne pathogens team cleaned up the drill press. We still had work to do, so another coworker got the parts and started using the drill press. He was almost done with the job and began screwing around saying, "Hey look! I'm Freddy and I'm going to drill my hand." Sure enough, he slipped and drilled right through his own hand. We had to call the ambulance back to take care of him. It's wild how quickly things can spiral. Freddy not paying attention and drilling his hand was bad enough, but then another coworker thought it was funny to imitate him. Next thing you know, he's in the same situation. Just a normal day in a machine shop, dealing with injuries and a repeat call for an ambulance. Makes you wonder about safety sometimes. I once saw someone pick up a rock and throw it as hard as he could at a moving train. He was laughing as he went up close to the train before he chucked it. The rock ricocheted back and went straight into his shoulder. The guy went flying backwards and dropped to the ground holding his shoulder as though he'd been shot and then ran towards the medical clinic screaming the whole time. That sounds pretty wild. It's crazy how people don't think about the consequences sometimes. I remember a friend trying to impress everyone by doing something reckless and ending up hurting himself. He ended up in the hospital, and we all learned a lesson about being careful. You think you'll be fine, but things can go south really fast. Guess that's just a part of life. Back when I worked on a farm a few years ago, owner made his new wife the farm manager. She read somewhere that chemicals were bad for plant soil, so refused to let us use necessary chemicals to get the field ready for cropping. We had the worst, most infested winter wheat I've ever seen that year. Next year she demanded that I add nitrate to everything, even the perennial gardens, which just ruined most of the herbs. In the course of just over 4 years I saw that farm go from making about $100K profit a year in crop and another $50K plus in equipment rental to going completely bankrupt. It's interesting how things can change with new management. The owner's wife had some pretty strong ideas about farming. Skipping the chemicals probably made things worse. And then the nitrate move seemed like a recipe for disaster, especially for the gardens. It's crazy to see a farm go from profitable to bankrupt in just a few years. Just shows how important it is to have the right approach in agriculture. Bobby in 2nd grade stapled his finger. Straight in and blood spurted out. Rushed out by teacher to the docks. Next day, he comes into class with a bandaged finger. We asked him, did it hurt? He says no. Then someone dares him to do it again, to prove it didn't hurt. Old Bobby, never one to shy away from a challenge, grabbed the stapler and slammed it down on his thumb. Staple stuck in and blood poured out. He screamed and back to the ER he went. Bobby was dumber than shit. That reminds me of a friend who was always up for a challenge, just like Bobby. One time, he tried to impress everyone by skateboarding down a steep hill. He wiped out pretty hard and ended up with a huge scrape on his arm. Instead of learning his lesson, he just got back up and tried again. It was kind of ridiculous, but you couldn't help but admire his spirit. My high school anatomy class had an incident. We did a lot of dissections. That day we had deer hearts. I went to school in a rural area, and the country boys were stoked to share hunting stories and began to continuously one-up each other. One kid said that he put blood all over his face, his first hunt, which is probably true as it's a common tradition with deer hunting. Another kid said that his dad made him drink the blood. This one guy, really good-looking guy but dumber than a box of rocks, bragged that when he went hunting, he would field dress the deer and eat the heart raw. The other kids called bullshit, and one of them said that if he was telling the truth, he would prove it and eat the dear heart on their lab table. With zero hesitation, he grabbed and bit off a chunk and swallowed it whole, but these hearts were already soaked in formaldehyde and preservatives. He started vomiting almost instantly. Our anatomy teacher didn't even flinch. She just rolled her eyes and sent him to the nurse. That definitely sounds like a memorable day in class. It's wild how competitive kids can get, especially with something like hunting. I guess some people just don't think through their actions. Eating something like that, knowing it was preserved, was just asking for trouble. The teacher's reaction is classic too, just another day for her while the kid learned a tough lesson. Used to work at KFC, and this guy wanted to go through drive-thru. He was in a large van with an extension on the roof. For some context, the speaker was outside, not sheltered, like the window. I told him his van wouldn't fit, but he wasn't having any of it. I had CCTV on the speaker, I could see that he wasn't going to fit. I told him he's like 3 inches too tall and to just park up and come inside and order. This guy gets out of his van and proceeds to vent air from his tires until they are basically flat. Me, my manager, and one of the cooks watched this guy over the space of about 10 minutes empty all the air from his tires in complete disbelief. He then tried to drive but could not control his van and was damaging his tires. He then blocked the drive-thru for about an hour because he couldn't go anywhere. My manager was so mad that he had to help the guy push his van out the drive-thru. They waited for AA for about an hour as well because the guy didn't have a pump or anything. From then on, whenever someone did something stupid, we were always like, yeah, but at least you're not van guy. That's a wild story. I can't believe the length some people go to just to prove a point. It sounds like a pretty long wait for everyone involved. It's funny how that incident turned into a sort of running joke at your work. At least you all had some laughs about it later. I guess it teaches a lesson about listening to the staff and not trying to force things. Neighborhood bully and his 2 friends catch 13-year-old me in the woods and took my pellet gun. Stated it was a cheap POS and couldn't hurt shit and won't even go through his shoe. I have no idea why he would believed or even say this. Proceeds to shoot self through shoe into his big toe with pellet lodged under his toenail. I thought for sure he would beat me up, but his friend laughed and called him a dumb ass, gave me my pellet gun back and I left. That sounds like a wild encounter. It's funny how things can flip so quickly. The bully talking trash, then ending up shooting himself, kind of ironic. I guess sometimes karma really does kick in. Those moments can stick with you, especially when you think you're in trouble, but it turns out differently. Good thing his friend was there to back you up, or it might have ended badly. I once worked with a guy who said with complete sincerity, "Isn't it amazing how when you get out disposable gloves, you always get a left and a right one?" Amongst this guy's other accolades were mopping an industrial kitchen bug zapper while it was switched on, throwing away huge stacks of plates because there were too many to wash. We had a delivery of new plates that same morning, cleaning the commercial-grade dishwasher by throwing in half a liter of washing-up liquid and switching it on, which filled the entire back of the restaurant with bubbles from floor to ceiling. I had a coworker like that too. He would somehow manage to mess up the simplest tasks. One time, he put the vacuum cleaner in the wrong place and it got stuck while he was trying to show off. It just stayed there making the weirdest noise. Everyone laughed, and he just shrugged it off. We all got used to his antics, but those moments definitely kept things interesting at work. Camping in high school's weather wasn't great, but watched someone try to light their fire, and they were struggling okay. So they grab a big can of white naphtha. I figure okay, they'll pour a bit on and throw a match, or not bad. Nope, they'll poured the whole gallon on. This should be fun to watch. They struck a match and then reached in to light it. So a bunch of us ran over to put him out and make sure he was okay. He lost his eyebrows and a good amount of hair, but overall he was surprisingly okay. That sounds intense. I remember a camping trip where someone tried to start a fire just like that. They used lighter fluid like it was a casual thing. When the fire shot up, we all freaked out and rushed over. Luckily, nobody got hurt, but it was a close call. After that, we all agreed on a safer way to do it. You learn quickly about fire safety when something like that happens. Someone almost hit me while I was riding a bike, stopped in the middle of the intersection around a blind corner, rolled down her window, hung out the side, and yelled, "You need to be more careful," before getting T-boned and running. That's wild. Just riding your bike and someone decides to shout instead of driving safe. It's funny how people can lose sight of their own mistakes while pointing fingers. Glad you avoided getting hit. Moments like that can really test your patience. You just want to enjoy the ride, and then you have to deal with someone else's choice. I worked at a hardware store. Someone came in complaining that the hose for their toilet wasn't working right, and we sold them something defective. It just wasn't delivering water. Guy thought the hose was too long, so he tied a knot in it. There were 2 massive kinks in the hose. He was so embarrassed when that got pointed out that he left the hose. That's pretty funny. I can picture the guy trying to fix the problem himself and just making it worse. It's always the simple mistakes that trip people up. I mean, who thinks to check for kinks in a hose, right? He must have felt pretty awkward when someone pointed it out. Just goes to show, sometimes you need to step back and take a look at the basics before trying to fix things. In 4th grade, our class is playing outside in the fields. Teacher warns us to stay away from the poison ivy on the fence. My classmate Tracy says, "That ain't poison ivy," and proceeds to pick leaves off and rub them on her face and arms. She was at school the next day but was unrecognizable due to the swelling and rash everywhere. I remember that day. Tracy thought she knew better, but the poison ivy didn't care about her confidence. She showed up looking rough, her face all puffy and red. The entire class couldn't stop staring. It was a lesson for everyone about not ignoring warnings. Sometimes, you just have to listen when people tell you things for your own good. Worked at a baseball park. Some kid trashed per public bathroom one night, smashing skylights and kicking in stall doors, then tried to drive in the muddy grass behind our ball field. He got his truck stuck, and then abandoned it, only to come back the next day with his parents in a much smaller car. They tried to drive their much smaller car all the way out to the stuck truck, got stuck, and had no choice but to call a tow truck. We arrive at the park the next day, and there are 2 flatbed trucks and several police. Found out kid was underage drinking, tried to drive out with his girlfriend to fuck in the truck where they got stuck. Parents tried to drive out there in an attempt to pull the truck free. Parents get fined for illegal parking, kids arrested for vandalism, underage drinking, driving while intoxicated, and illegal parking. We are stuck with cleaning it all up. Probably not the most moronic thing I've seen, but it's what comes to mind. That kid really went for it. Just the idea of trying to hide and then dragging the parents into it is something else. I can picture the chaos at the park the next day with all the trucks and police. It's wild how a night out can lead to all that trouble. You end up with a mess to clean up while they all face the consequences. Just a rough day for everyone involved. I was delivering pizza during the winter one day and got flagged down by a girl and her friends who had gotten stuck. She did this by jumping in front of my car on the slippery hill she had just slid off of. Upon getting out to help, I observed that they had plowed straight into the corner, were hung up on a big rock, one wheel buried in mud and snow, the other not even touching the ground. Then, the girl who had flagged me down uttered words that still ring in my head, "I don't understand the physics of what's going on here." I tried to explain, but she still insisted we try to push them out. So, I made a show of attempting it. Car obviously didn't budge. When that didn't work, she insisted I pull a tow rope out of my ass and pull her out using my car. A subcompact Scion XA. That thing didn't even take 4 quarts of oil in an oil change. It felt like it was topping out with 3 friends riding in it. Again, I tried to explain how impossible her request was and once again offered to call a tow truck, which she once again refused. It was then that she revealed that she had sent another one of their friends off on foot to look for help. During the winter on slippery back roads in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. They didn't even know where they were. I ended up leaving and calling the cops to help find her friend and make them get towed out. That sounds pretty wild. It's interesting how people can get so fixated on a solution that clearly isn't going to work. I once had a buddy get stuck in the snow and insisted we could push his car out. Just ended up digging it in deeper. Sometimes you just gotta accept reality and call for backup. That girl really had no clue about the situation. Gotta love winter adventures, though. Me and my friend were driving to Seattle. He realized he missed his turn on a busy highway and decided to do a U-turn. His car wasn't even close to making it, so I'm stuck there with a car coming straight at me at 50 miles per hour. He had to do a 3-point turn with cars honking at us the whole time. I still haven't forgiven him. That sounds intense. I get how frustrating that could be, just sitting there while he's trying to maneuver. The pressure of other drivers isn't fun either. It's wild how one missed turn can lead to such a mess. I guess that's one way to test your friendship. Hope you guys can laugh about it now. I was in a grocery store walking up to the self-checkout area when a customer at one of the checkout stations accidentally dropped a 6-pack of beer bottles. Of course, they smashed into a ton of broken glass shards all over the floor. The teenage girl working that area came over to clean it up and very calmly removed both of her shoes and placed them a safe distance away from the mess before starting to clean it up with a broom and dustpan while completely barefoot. At some point I did ask her why she took her shoes off, and she looked at me like I was crazy and said those are new shoes. That's actually a funny scene. It's neat how some people think ahead like that. The girl must have been pretty confident about cleaning up the mess. Just goes to show how casual some folks can be amid chaos. Dropping a 6-pack can create a lot of stress, but she handled it like a pro. It's all about priorities, I guess. New shoes over a couple of shards of glass. Smart move. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.